Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for today's IL Social Studies Comm. As you know, my name is Katie Elvidge. I'm the Social Science Content Specialist. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Kathy Rodas. She's a Social Studies and ELA Content Specialist. We'll be your hosts for today's IL Social Studies Comm. Our team of content specialists is employed by the Center for Educational Initiatives at Illinois State University, and we partner with ISB to support teachers in Illinois with implementation and the learning standards. We, of course, have our lovely guest speaker today, Ellen Daneels, who is a civics instructional specialist with the Illinois Civic Mission Coalition. A little housekeeping, and we kind of already talked about this, but Beth, if you guys need to type messages or want to speak, either is fine. If you get weird feedback and you're not talking, sometimes muting yourself helps. Other than that, in the chat window, I'm going to paste a bunch of links, including the link to the pre and post survey. So I know, Beth, you may have sent some of those out to your team because you're having that wonderful watch party. But just in case, there is a bit.ly with a short pre and post survey that you're welcome to take. And then I think I will turn it over to Mary Ellen if nobody else has any questions.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you, Katie and Kathy, for this opportunity to share our work at the McCormick Foundation. For those of you in Edwardsville that don't know me and people that are watching later by recording, my name is Ellen Daneels, and after 27 years in the classroom in West Chicago, I have been on a leave of absence for the last several years to do professional development around the state of Illinois, around the new Illinois Social Studies standards. Katie and I were both on the task force that helped write those standards, and also around the new middle school and high school civics requirement. So this idea about dialogue about our deepest differences really is prescient in the work that I do. So I hope today to guide you through some strategies that we will engage with digitally, a number of resources and big ideas to support this important work in K through 12 classrooms. Katie is going to be sharing with you later a tiny URL in which this slide deck and other resources I'll be referencing will be available to you after the recording. Okay, so let's get started. And welcome, Julie. All right. Now, why is this work so difficult, dialogue right now in our classrooms? I think all of us have felt this, this political polarization that makes these conversations challenging, and the struggle that we feel is real. This is data from the Pew Research Center that shows that political polarization has increased among the general public. We can see the distribution of people that self-identified as liberal and conservative in 1994, 2004, 2014, and then 2017. I imagine there's an even deeper chasm now in 2020. And in his book, The Big Sort, Bill Bishop talks about how 40 years ago, local political heterogeneity reigned. And actually, even today as a nation, we're pretty heterogeneous in the aggregate, but we've become more homogenous by zip code, meaning we tend to live by people that have jobs like us, that think like us, have partisanship like us, that have faith traditions like us. And this has had an impact on the quality of civil discourse. And company, and to the extent that we do, generally speaking, it's with our ideological soulmates. And this is even amplified in this era of media and digital media. We're able to curate news. We are able to curate our friends and who we follow based on our own biases and perspectives on the world. I imagine all of us, perhaps in the last 10 years, perhaps have chosen to unfollow or unfriend someone online because of these sorts of conversations. And that just sort of amplifies this divide, this polarization. And there's something else that has happened as a result of this that really, I think a lot of us are seeing this in our classrooms. And I call this the phenomenon of the other. You know, other, for most of my life, was a noun, but now we're using it a bit as a verb. meaning to treat another culture as fundamentally different from another class of individuals, often emphasizing its apartness. And this political polarization has really resulted in the othering of individuals. And this othering can take the form of speaking to a group of people as them, or putting a label in front of people like the immigrants, the Democrats, the Republicans. And this othering can range from race to gender, to sexuality, to regional accents, to hair color. And I'm sure all of us have heard this in our classrooms in one way or another. And often students do not mean this with malintent, but it's a learned behavior. It's something that they see represented in the media, and it's something that we really need to confront in our classrooms. And really, there's an opportunity cost to not confronting this issue. As it says here from an article that I've hyperlinked for you, The Problem of Othering, othering is a term that not only encompasses the many expressions of prejudice based on group identities, but also it provides a clarifying frame that reveals a set of propagate inequality and marginality. And I think all of us in our schools are confronting these ideas of implicit bias. All of us probably have initiatives related to culturally sustainable pedagogy. And so really this dialogue over our deepest differences is really crucial to this work. Now, I gave you a bit of bad news. The rest of this is going to be upbeat and good news, okay? Because the fact of the matter is that this political polarization and othering is not inevitable. And really what we do in our classrooms offer a promise for a better future. Our friends at CIRCLE out of Tufts University, CIRCLE stands for the Center for Information and Research for Civic Learning and Engagement, which is why we call it CIRCLE, because that's a mouthful. Really has research that shows that we could teach a new generation to be civil, responsible, and constructive citizens. That's the solution for our polarized and dysfunctional politics. And if I can get on my soapbox for a minute, this is not just the work of social studies teachers. All of us are civics teachers. We all send messages to our students about power, about bias, about equity, about justice, through the way we run our classrooms, the norms we set, the behaviors we normalize. And so this is important work that I hope those of you that are here, maybe they're social studies teachers, really engage your whole school in this conversation, because this dialogue is super important for all of us to engage in.
We should get you a really big soapbox to go on for that one, because that's important to remember.
Yes, absolutely. Now, what I want to talk about today a little bit is, where do we start? Now, a lot of teachers often get nervous about embracing student voice and dialogue because they automatically think that these conversations have to turn into a debate. That really is what is modeled in the public sphere. But I would really encourage you to not debate in your classroom, rather to facilitate dialogue or deliberations. And this is actually a hyperlink to a great website on the teaching channel, Deep Dive Educating for Democracy, that has all sorts of resources and videos about what this could look like in your classroom. But what I want to do is support maybe a strategy that you can use with your students to help them visualize the difference between dialogue and debate. So this strategy is one that's called Find My Rule. This is a Spencer Kagan strategy, if you're familiar with cooperative learning. Sometimes it's called two-box induction. And I hope all of you choose to play along here. So Julie, in your chat box, you can play along, all right? So what I'm going to do, and this is what I do with my students, is I'm going to sort a number of statements into being either in category A or category B. And it's going to be your job to define the pattern. Why are some of these statements in A and others in B? Are we ready to go? Okay. Kathy and Katie, I'm expecting big things from you here. All right.
You ready? All right. Julie's ready.
Okay, so let's start out with the first few. Column A is collaborative. Column A enlarges one's point of view. column A searches for agreement. Column B is oppositional. It reaffirms one's point of view. And it searches for differences. Now, when I do this with my students, I've given them a few examples on each side, and I would pause here and maybe have them do a turn and talk or numbered heads together in their small group and ask them, what do you think is the pattern? Why do you think those 3 items are in column A? Why are the others in column B? So if you had to guess, use your spidey senses, what do you think the pattern is?
I want to know if anyone else is typing because I started typing. You may speak too if you'd like, Beth. Or
yeah, we don't have that
folks.
Many people that you can't unmute yourself.
Oh, Julie, column A is dialogue, column B is debate.
Okay, can you go a little bit deeper? What do you mean by that? Like, what are some of the qualities, some of the descriptors here that kids might use? Julie, we're not hearing you, I'm afraid. Or I'm not.
I'm not either, I'm sorry.
Edwardville, what do you say? Okay, that's kind of some teacher talk. What are some words do you think kids would come up with if they looked at these things?
I know oppositional is not a kid word, but when you said the reaffirming point of view, very closed off would be, kind of be the right one. Column A is not fun, column B is fun, is what Julie said.
Yeah. And I've heard kids say column A is open, column B is more closed-minded, right? If they've been teaching things like growth mindset in their buildings, sometimes I've heard that language being used as well. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to put a few more words up there. And again, get into kids' minds, how might they discern these patterns? And I realize the words I'm using right now are probably middle high schooly. Just know that in an adjacent slide, I have some K through 5 friendly words you could use with this same strategy, okay?
Awesome.
So column A calls for you to suspend your own beliefs. Column B, you invest wholeheartedly in your beliefs. Column B, you listen to respond. Column A, you listen to understand. Any other descriptors we can use besides the ones we've heard so far to kind of explain this?
I don't want to cut anybody off, but I see my kids would say column A seems hard, column B is easier, that's what we naturally might do, right? You try to listen to respond rather than really take it to heart and understand.
Yeah, absolutely.
Column A, problem solving. Column B, the goal is to win.
Oh, okay. Again, and these are all ideas I would capture on a board with students, like with an A and a B, and sort of write them down so they can see the language they're using to kind of explain the pattern. All right, now at this point of Find My Rule, what happens is we're going to change it up a little bit. Oh, I forgot a couple one. A is open-ended, B is conclusive. All right. Now, we're going to change it up a little bit, and I'm going to give you a statement, and then I would have my students tell me, what do they think it is, an A or a B? So, causes you to think about your own biases. Does that sound like an A or a B statement? You could say A. B. What do we think? B. Oh, sign language. I like it. Or A. A was what you said. Yeah, A. All right. Assumes that many people have pieces of the answer and together a workable solution can be found. What do we think? A. Yeah. No moss grows under your trees. Causes a critique of other positions.
Oh.
I say.
Okay, that's a little bit more B.
The indecisiveness there.
It's a bit more B. Okay, winning's the goal. I think I heard this already from somebody.
Julie said that one, I think. Yep.
Yep, B. All right, You submit your best thinking and you defend it against challenges.
I think you could.
B. Yep. Okay, let's go one more. You try to understand and empathize with the lived experiences of others. Yeah, A. Okay. Now what you do with students is you have them kind of put their heads together, and I think we kind of know what this is, but it's kind of interesting to hear what the kids come up with. What should we title the columns? And I would tell them they can use some of the descriptors that we put on the board of the language they already used, or they can come up with something else. And Julie, because she's a rock star, yes, these are both ways that we can engage student voice, but one is describing dialogue, the other is describing debate, right? Now, I could just tell my students, dialogue is blah, 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 blah. Debate is sha-na, na, 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 na. And define that for them. But this is a way for them to kind of use their own cognitive map and lived experiences to kind of try to figure out what the pattern is and define it in their own words. And I find that makes the content stickier and they remember it, right? Because we have those words they came up with, like winning and hard versus easy, or, you know, growth mindset versus fixed mindset, making connection to other things they've been learning about. And at this point, you could also ask the students, what are some other words do you think we could use to describe each sort of column to kind of build on it? Now, I did this activity recently with some K through 5 teachers, and I asked them to come up and brainstorm some words that they could use to do this activity with elementary school students. And these are some of the words that they came up with. Column A, they said that these were more sort of elementary user-friendly words, and quite frankly, they might be more high school-friendly words for some of my students as well, right? So, again, the ones at the bottom might be kind of interesting to you. This is actually from some teachers in Joliet. With their elementary school students, they talked a lot about bubblegum questions and bubblegum talk. These are questions and ideas that pop, that are sticky, that are fun to chew on.
Huh.
Brick talk are heavy. They just fall to the ground with a clunk, and it's not any fun.
Huh, I've never heard those. Interesting.
I'm glad you came to today's webinar, okay? So again, this is something that you could do to have the students sort of come up with this. Now, Find My Rule is a strategy that not only you could use with your students to kind of help them understand the difference between dialogue and debate, but you could also use it, and I've used it with my students to teach them the difference between primary and secondary sources, showing them examples and see if they can figure out the pattern. Even with quotes like patriots versus loyalists. You could do it with examples and non-examples like fact versus opinion, maybe a need versus a want, or even manipulatives. You could use quotes or images, again, to help them build that schema, that mind map, to try to figure out that pattern to define two binary choices. Because again, we can say what dialogue and debate is and how we're trying to perpetuate dialogue, but really engaging kids and understanding what that is super important to give them a vision of what that might be like. So that's some place to start. Now, another place to start is that this sort of dialogue or conversation that we just defined doesn't just happen. You're not born with it. It's not passed down but in the gene pool. And really, you have to create an ecosystem for it to happen in. So Facing History and Ourselves are great partners in this work, and I've hyperlinked for you a toolkit that they've created that you could use to create a climate for conversation by actually engaging kids in creating the norms for interaction. I think many of us are doing work around restorative justice, and restorative justice isn't what happens just when kids get in trouble, but it's engaging them in creating the norms and how we're going to live together in our classroom, which is really the most essential question for social studies, right? How should we live together? How should we live together in this classroom this semester? One thing that I do with my students from day one is I might just ask them, hey, what would a classroom where you're engaged in really productive civil conversations look like, feel like, and sound like? Ask them that question. Reflect back on a classroom where you really felt like you could have good, safe conversations. What was that like? And you could use something like Poll Everywhere or Mentimeter or Answer Garden to collect their answers and make a word cloud where the students define, this is what this space should be like for dialogue. And you can even take this a little bit further and use those words to create norms that you post in your classroom for these sorts of conversations. My friend Teresa Kruger, who teaches in Belvedere, did this very thing with her students. And I love what her kids came up with. Stay engaged by participating. Be respectful and pay attention when others are speaking. Be patient and wait your turn. Let others finish before you speak. Stay focused on the topic. Add to what's already been said. Can I get a witness, teachers? Be prepared so you know what you're talking about. Provide evidence to support your ideas. Speak the truth, just don't be rude about it. Assume good intentions. Be respectful of other opinions. Agree to disagree. It's okay to disagree. And name calling and personal attacks, or what we already defined as othering, are unacceptable. If you have nothing nice to say, say nothing. And Teresa shares that after their first discussion, they revisit these norms. Are they working for us? Did we forget something? And it's something they revisit throughout the semester. Now, in the elementary classroom, perhaps the contracts look a little bit different. Oh, and we have a question, Julie, please. And I can't hear you, you're still muted.
Yeah, you're still muted.
There we are, maybe. We can't hear you. Could you type it in for us?
Ooh.
Oh, you have some sort of rubric that you use for this?
This is a rubric made out of our class norms.
Oh, yeah.
The students self-evaluate at the end of each quarter for their citizenship grade. It is different for each class.
Perfect.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Maybe you could email that to Katie and we could put it in the Google Drive folder.
Oh, that would be lovely if you don't mind sharing.
Yeah, and I have a resource I'm going to be sharing with you about how you can engage students in creating rubrics like this as well.
Comments at the bottom. Oh, that's great. Oh, great.
Yep. Perfect.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing, Julie.
Julie, if your mic was working, I just yield the floor to you at this moment, and you could take it for the rest of the way. But anyways, so yeah, absolutely, even having the students reflect and create that rubric for their citizenship grade or whatever that might be in your classroom. And something I've even done with students to that effect is, what's one aspect of the rubric you really want to focus on this week or in this quarter to grow in? And then for them to collect evidence to this effect. I've also created something where you could ask this class as a whole, what do we want to improve in as a class? And then individually, what do I want to improve in as well? So that's something I could share as well. So again, class contracts might look different for elementary kids. And there are some resources, again, Facing History, Teaching Tolerance, and that Teaching Channel website all have resources to help you engage in this work and maybe give you some ideas to enhance what you're already doing in the classroom. Now, something else to think about in engaging in this work is sometimes, whoops, excuse me, here we go. I like to talk about that we really need to teach dialogue and civics from the inside out. And that work kind of begins with us as teachers. We have to acknowledge how our own lived experiences shape our behaviors before we engage students in this work. We have our own implicit biases that we come to the classroom with. And before we have kids explore their own, sometimes we have to explore ourselves as well. So a couple of tools to help you do this. One is from Project Implicit from Harvard University, and they have an online survey that you could take, and if you have high school kids, it would be appropriate for them to do this as well, to take this survey to identify maybe some biases that you weren't aware of in your life. And again, these implicit biases are not bad or evil. It's a way we make sense of the world. But when we don't recognize how it impacts our view of the world, that's when it can become dangerous. In addition, Teaching Tolerance has some tools for elementary school students to engage with in this work as well, to kind of explore their own identities and how it frames their conversations and views of others. So again, for high school folks, I would talk about Project Implicit. For middle school, elementary to middle school, Teaching Tolerance. And then this is a link to a blog, actually a newsletter that I wrote. Our February newsletter had several free resources around implicit bias that I shared. So this is a link right here to that newsletter where I kind of summarized what implicit bias was and free resources to help your students with it. And look, there's the newsletter. It's almost like I know what I'm doing, all right? So there's the hyperlink directly to that newsletter. All right, something else I want to talk about that maybe you need to be cognizant of is, again, be clear on your goal of discussion or dialogue. Discussion can be used to build consensus using something like the structured academic controversy, to clarify understanding and promote understanding of a complex text or issue, like a Socratic seminar. Even build empathy for the lived experiences of others. There's no one-size-fits-all with discussion. There's lots of different protocols, and I'm going to share several of them with you in the Google Drive folder. But something else to really be to think about is that, again, our students' lived experiences are important to consider in these conversations. And there was a great report written by Joe Kahn, Jessica Marshall, and Kathy Cohen, you might know her from CASTLE, called Let's Go There, Making a Case for Race, Ethnicity, and a Lived Civics Approach to Civics Education. And again, we have to go there with these issues of race. The new mandate from the state of Illinois says we have to go there with LGBTQ issues. How do we do this in a safe way that really is respectful of students and their differences, and in a way that we're not using students' experiences as an object lesson, right? So this is a great report that's just several pages that you could look at, and I would encourage you maybe to read it and have a conversation in your curriculum teams about what it means for you and your buildings. And even if you're in a homogeneous building, your students who might be homogenous are going to interact with the outside world someday. So we have to prepare them for that more heterogeneous world, even if your school is very homogenous. This is something that I sometimes use with my students before I even engage them in a current and controversial issue discussion. And I'm just going to ask you guys really quick, when you think about having current and controversial issue discussions in a classroom, which image best represents how you feel about that work? Now, I have to tell you, depending on who's absent on a given day, you could go from B to C really quick, right? But in general, when you think about having this sort of dialogue and conversations, which image represents how you feel about that?
Julie, oh, Julie
has moved to her bedroom.
No, that was just to me, Julia, that you typed. She says D for Julie.
Okay.
I agree about, that's where I was leading too. I like the picture idea, by the way, Mary Ellen. I've used sometimes the continuum, but the pictures are a great way to tap in. Edwardsville, do you have any letters to throw out? I don't know if we can hear them. Oh.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you, Katie.
Oh, no, that's okay. Do you guys have any letters to throw out about your comfort level?
Did you hear that? It depends on the topic.
Absolutely.
Maybe even the parents of the students in the class.
Yeah, you know, I will often do this with adult learners, but also with students, because there's power in the interpretation of the pictures. You know, sometimes people pick letter A because they're looking down and they're trying to figure out how to bring their students up. Other people look at letter A like, is it safe to jump and do this? Other people look at letter A like, I feel like I want to jump if you're going to make me do this, right?
Right.
Letter B, there's kind of a funny story. Letter B is usually a lot of people who celebrate this and think, yes, this is great. I was doing a workshop once a couple of months ago with a large group of teachers, and one of the older teachers came up to me and said, I don't belong in corner B. And I said, well, what letter did you pick? I picked B. Well, why don't you belong over there? And she said, everybody in corner B is celebrating like, this is great. And I picked letter B because I saw it as, no, don't make me do it. No. Okay. But again, we all have our lived experiences depending on the topic, depending on the students in our class, depending on what's happened in the past or what our administrator has said to us about how we feel about doing these conversations. But we have to realize that our students come in with all sorts of baggage about how they feel about deliberations and dialogue. Perhaps at home, disagreement is not a safe thing. Maybe at home, when you disagree, you talk louder, and that's what's been modeled to them. Maybe in another classroom, they got mixed messages about disagreement, with the teacher in particular. So kind of tapping into the kids, even before you have these conversations, like how do these conversations make you feel and why? I wouldn't ask the kids just to pick the letter, but explain why you picked that letter. And if you feel like it depends on the topic, you could even get more clear, like what's your comfort level with discussing gun control and why? You know, and that could give you as a quick bell ringer or exit slip some really interesting information to know like how the kids are feeling about this. Or maybe even after a discussion, you feel it went really well. How do you feel it went? Give them these images and explain why. Maybe there was some subtext you weren't aware of that you really should be aware of. For elementary school kids, it could be with emojis, right? In addition, my friend, Dr. Paula McAvoy, who is one of the experts on using controversy in the classroom, she talks about maybe even giving students this simple frame before a conversation. When I think about discussing, let's say, the coronavirus, I feel this way because what are they feeling? What are they thinking? Why do they feel that way? Even giving them this simple prompt before you have the conversation can really give you some valuable information about, again, fears they have, support they may need, misinformation they have. So again, some of this pre-work is important. Something else I do sometimes is a human barometer or something with Post-it notes. So even before I have the conversation on something controversial, I might ask them, before we even start looking at data and resources and grounding your knowledge, how do you feel about lowering the voting age to 16 or arming teachers or mandatory vaccinations, whatever the topic may be? And have the kids write it on a Post-it note and put it up on the spectrum here. And if you do that the day before the conversation, even if all of them are on one side or another, you can read their reasons why and sometimes pick out the nuance to discuss. Or if you read their reasons why, maybe there's some misinformation out there that you need to address. You need to find some texts that counter some of this misinformation. So this is being done very low tech. You certainly could use something like Padlet or a Google Doc to do this work as well. So again, thinking about those lived experiences, what they're coming in with. Don't seek out controversy for the sake of controversy. This all should be aligned with the standards, right? And that's something that's very easy to do. Of course, if any of you teach 6 through 12, we have a new civics mandate that requires current and societal issue discussions. So certainly these conversations can be aligned with this. But also, dialogue is really integral to the instructional shifts of the new social studies standards and, quite frankly, other educational initiatives that we're being asked to do. The new standards ask us to engage student voice in crafting essential and important questions. Again, using those questions in dialogue is very responsive to where kids are at. It's culturally responsive pedagogy, and it's really best practice.
Mary Ellen,
cultivating these collaborative go ahead, please.
Julie chimed in the chat that sometimes controversy seeks you. Those natural occurrences come up in conversation with your kids.
Yeah,
absolutely. The standards and what they're working on, being responsive to the classroom.
Yes, absolutely. And sometimes these kids, they see you as the only safe place to explore these things they're struggling with.
Yeah.
So we need to have the space to figure that out and do it. Because if we're not talking about whether it be coronavirus or whether it be arming teachers or whether it be whatever the controversy du jour of the day is, they're talking about it on the bus, they're talking about it in the lunchroom. We need to be the place where they're getting accurate information, and we're modeling how to do this in a civil way. Okay? So thank you for that comment, Julie. Yeah, you can run, but you can't hide. It's going to find you, right? Again, the standards ask us to cultivate these collaborative and civic spaces, and that really aligns with what we're being asked to do with social emotional learning competencies. I think all of us have heard of the Danielson Framework. We're all being evaluated on the Danielson Framework, and it really asks us to integrate content and skills purposefully. We can integrate the skill of dialogue. We can integrate the Common Core ELA literacy practices, or as my friend from Georgia likes to call it, the swirl. Speaking, writing, illustrating, reading, and listening. We can integrate these things with these conversations. This dialogue doesn't always have to be oral. We could do it digitally using Google Classroom and Schoolology, modeling online civil discourse. And of course, these dialogues can be a tangible opportunity for students to communicate conclusions and maybe even take informed action if this dialogue is being done in front of an authentic audience that are change makers. So again, this dialogue, be mindful about the power of it and how it really integrates with the standards and other things we're being asked to do.
Mary Ellen?
Yes.
Julie had a question or a thought. She said she's thought about integrating dialogue, but not sure how to assess, like a performance-based assessment. I know you maybe mentioned earlier, are you going to talk about that a little bit today, or do you have any thoughts about it that you'd like to share at the moment?
Sure. Well, Julie, if she would like to, can reach out to me and I can share some rubrics and some ideas that I've curated and collected. And there's going to be some things in the Google Drive folder for you as well.
Oh, perfect.
Okay.
Did you see her? Could you see her?
Yes, I saw a thumbs up.
Okay.
I saw a thumbs up.
Very appreciative.
Double thumbs up. All right.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure. All right. Another thing I want to talk about is what I say is build the muscles before swimming into deeper waters. And what I mean by that is, for example, I teach in West Chicago, Illinois. We have over a 50% Latinx population. My first dialogue is not going to be on immigration policy. That's something I'm going to build up to, right? A lot of teachers get really excited about this work and they think they're going to drop a thought bomb and like, let's talk about abortion, and if you have not helped kids build the muscles of dialogue and know what it looks like, feels like, and sounds like in a very structured way, I'm telling you, no good can come of it. So you really want to build the muscles before swimming into these deeper waters. I'm not telling you not to go there. We have to go there, but practice with maybe a less emotionally charged topic before you go there, like banning plastic straws or whatever that topic might be, right? So think about what are the topics that we can practice that align with the standards that we can build up to maybe some of those more emotionally charged issues with our students. And then finally, whoops, I'm getting out of control here. Wait a second here. Create a safe space in troubling times. We should not be exploiting tragedy for the purpose of dialogue in our classrooms or debate in our classrooms. We should not be discussing arming teachers right after a school shooting. We should be having a conversation with our kids about where they're at, how they feel, what questions they have. We probably shouldn't be deliberating policy on the coronavirus right now because kids are really scared. Some kids are scared. We should be talking about how are they feeling about this? What are your questions? To be there for them. So this is a link that I have hyperlinked. It's a blog I wrote a while ago about with free resources to create a safe space in troubling times. We're asked to create that space in times of tragedy. I hope you never have to use this link, but if you feel like you're ill-equipped, I know I have to be there for the kids, this thing has happened, I don't know what to do. This gives you some tools to help you do that. And I mentioned the coronavirus, and I've already curated for you, and I've hyperlinked for you some resources that I found today about this. So this is more appropriate for elementary students, from PBS Kids for parents, and then something for more of the adult, middle school, high school students, about how to talk to kids about the coronavirus, because kids are hearing about schools shutting down. They're hearing about the numbers growing. So again, these might be some resources that are helpful to you.
I enjoy that was just Daniel Tiger, and Julie says she uses him in high school as well.
Okay. So, Daniel spans the ages, really.
I mean.
Yeah. All right. Now, something that I want to mention that I'm involved with that supports this work very quickly is that we've actually created a micro-credential course to support the use of current and controversial issues in the classroom. It's a free online micro-credential, and we're going to be having a new course this July if teachers are interested. It's a 5-week course. And our first course that we're going to be doing this July is on current and controversial issue discussions, and it's hosted on Free for Teachers Canvas. And what each course does is each week there's a module that's opened. The first module is on orientation, how do you create that climate. The second module is the what and why on current and controversial issue discussions. We have interviewed academic experts like Diana Hess, Paula McAvoy, and others to talk about exactly what are we talking about with dialogue and discussions. Module 3 is the most exciting. It's the how do you do it. So we have demonstration videos of teachers in class, sample ready-to-go student guides and teacher guides to facilitate things like Socratic seminars, structured academic controversies, and philosophical chairs in the classroom. I almost forgot that last one. Module 4 is overcoming obstacles. How do I assess these conversations? Julie, I have your back here. You know, how do I respond to administrator and teacher concerns? You know, wait, Mary Ellen, back this up. How do I even start? So how do I manage the classroom if things go wrong? What do I do? So module 4 is sort of choose your own adventure. What's the obstacle that's prescient for you? And then we share resources and videos to help you figure that out. And in module 4, we do a deeper dive into the problem of teacher disclosure. Should you be telling kids what you think about these issues? We kind of dive into the research about that. I'm not going to tell you the answer. You have to take the course. I'm not going to tell you the end of the movie.
I like it. Keep us in suspense.
And then finally, module 5 is helping you create a plan of action. So these are just some brief quotes from some teachers who have taken the course that talk about how they used to feel nervous about this, but now they feel prepared. How they realized with the right combination of creating a class environment and well thought out strategies, how landmines can be avoided. And even how it's doable in a small rural school. So guardiansofdemocracyteachers.org is the website where you can sign up for more information for this free course. I just wanted to take a minute or two, I hope you don't mind, Kathy and Katie, about this.
Not at all.
That it's free for teachers to really help you in this work if this webinar makes you want to go a little bit deeper into this. And we also model really great online teaching strategies you can use with your students on Schoology, Canvas, and Blackboard, or whatever your online portal might be if you do have that with teachers. How do you go beyond recording your lectures or PowerPoints, right? Like, how can I make this interactive? Oh, and I even have a QR scan if you like that.
Oh, lovely.
Oh, I know. Look at that. I'm so high tech.
I'm impressed.
Yes. So if you also want some other work around this, IllinoisCivics.org is my website where we have lesson plans around current and controversial issue discussions that you can check out. We have a blog that we publish weekly to sort of tackle these issues. And we have a newsletter. Our newsletter was about implicit bias. We share in our newsletter every month resources and strategies around each of the proven practices of civic education, including current and controversial issue discussions. And again, this is free for teachers.
Julie gave your website a heart. I don't know if you could see it.
Oh, thank you, Julie.
Love
Good.
your resources. Good.
Thank you. I'm so glad, because we try to structure every lesson around kids communicating their conclusion and perhaps taking informed action. So whether it's the Little Rock Nine, how do we engage in a dialogue about our responsibility to be upstanders in times of injustice, or the Holocaust, or something like flag burning, or even Native American mascots. Are those appropriate in public schools? We really have lesson plans that really embrace the inquiry arc of the social studies standards and facilitate structured, engaged, safe conversations. So with that, I'm going to pause to see if there's any specific questions.
Julie, we actually do have one in the chat window. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
I'm so
off.
excited.
Julie says, one issue that immediately comes to mind is how to differentiate for EL students and other students who might need extra time to process information.
Yeah, something in my class, in my school, I am the teacher that deals with a lot of the students that are English learners, sheltered. I teach sheltered classes. I find often using sentence starters is something that's very helpful for them. And I can put some of those sentence starters in the Google Drive folder for you.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
Also, language around transition statements. So language, not only for the EL learners, but even for other students, about how do you invite others into the conversation? What is the language that you could use to ask a follow-up question or to disagree in an agreeable way? So I think those sentence starters in language are important. Something I also do with my English learners in our deliberations is sometimes before we have the conversation, I'll have like a little mini recess where they can actually talk to one another in their native language a little bit, just to kind of make sure that they're on the right page before we practice it in the English language. I find that that's helpful as well.
Great idea, yeah.
And another resource, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this as far as texts are concerned, that I've been sharing in a lot of workshops is something called rewordify.com. Maybe you've heard of this, maybe other people in Edwardsville haven't, I don't know. But rewordify.com is a free app where kids, or you could copy and paste text in, and it simplifies the language. It kind of is a free newsella.
Okay.
That's somewhat supportive for those students as well. So that's sort of what I would, some things that really worked for me.
I hadn't heard of Rewordify, so thank you. Kathy was nodding her head, but I hadn't heard of that one.
It's great. And you said Rewordify is free for teachers?
Yes, rewordify.com.
Nice. None of us had heard of that.
It's worth the price of admission today if I've done nothing else. Rewordify.com. Any other questions? And maybe I'll show you what's in the Google Drive folder if we have a little bit of time.
You do have a few minutes. I'm going to put a bunch of links in the chat window. The first one is to the post survey, and then the second link, everybody, is to the Google Drive that Mary Ellen is going to show you. If you want to walk through simultaneously, you're welcome to do both.
Right, so this slide deck is in the Google Drive folder, so the hyperlinks that are throughout are available for you. I also put in here the fall journal of ASCD did a whole thing on implicit bias that might be interesting to you. I also have some things from Facing History, 8 components of a reflective classroom. So how do you create this space? They talk a little bit about that. This is a handout from a friend of mine, Brian Gibbs, from the University of North Carolina, of different discussion types. So they have descriptions of things like Socratic seminar, group interview, that maybe would, give you some ideas of how to have this sort of dialogue in class. The 2-box induction, or the Find My Rule I just did, actually comes from this handout from the Institute for Peace of Dialogue versus Debate that you could use with your students. And I just put this in just because I like you guys. This is an 11-page document of formative assessment techniques to check for understanding. So again, these are different strategies that you can gauge kids in quick conversations to see if things are tracking. So this might be something that's helpful for you as well, to scaffold these discussions, to process them, and even have them. And then finally, this is actually something from that course that I shared with you. There are basically 4 different components to current and controversial issue discussions that we've identified, and we've talked about them briefly in our conversation today. Things like creating a climate for discussion, things like facilitating knowledge grounding, like giving them something to talk about. They need to have content to talk about. Facilitating the discussion itself. And then finally, closure and reflection strategies. So what this document does is it kind of gives indicators for each of those components. And if you find yourself lacking resources for that component, bada bing, bada boom, I have hyperlinked free resources to help you with that. So if you're like, I need some really good resources that are fair and to kind of have these conversations, here are some free resources that are fair that give multiple perspectives. If you're wondering, I need some strategies to help do this, here are some links to some videos and strategies to help have these conversations. And again, to go back to the beginning, even to just create that climate for discussion, here are again some resources around identity and bias, engaging kids in creating norms, creating questions, and even to Julie's point, creating rubrics for these conversations. So a lot of teachers have said this is their favorite thing in the course. So it's something that you might want to look at as well in one or more of the areas to help you with this.
Awesome.
So I'm going to stop sharing and give it back to Katie because I think she has some links and stuff to share. Yes?
Well, yeah, most of them are in the chat window for everybody.
Okay.
Mary Ellen, Julie did have a quick question about, she was curious about like a sample curriculum plan or how for a civics government class, because it's a struggle to find time to teach all those skills. I know you at Illinois Civics have a curriculum design toolkit. Would that help with the planning and organization of that, or do you have other suggestions?
Yeah,
that's a hard, every school, every
is.
district has different needs, but
it's really local control. And
correct.
Julie, I'm not sure what grade level you teach. Are you teaching in high school?
Right. 12th, I believe.
Yeah.
If I'm reading lips. 12th grade, yes.
Yeah. You know, we do have some sample lessons that sort of embed this in this, but I think it's really more than just a 12th grade thing. Like I said, all teachers are civics teachers. So I think it's really a departmental thing to talk about K through 12, especially with these new standards. What's the vertical articulation that we can do with essential and supporting questions, evaluating sources and using evidence that we can do so that when they get to Julie in 12th grade, this is not something new. This is something that they've been working on, and she's really the capstone for this. But I would say, Julie, that's something that we are working on in the next month on Illinois Civics is much like that document I just showed you, the toolkit for current and controversial issue discussions. We're building one out also for simulations and the service learning informed action. So hopefully that will help you and give you some more tools to embed that. And I also do a workshop around creating performance assessments in social studies you could check out on our calendar, which is really about designing curriculum that ends with a performance assessment, right? So that, I think, is something that could be helpful. We do have a couple of workshops if you go to illinoiscivics.org that maybe you want to join us in, and we'll be having more in the fall as well.
Wonderful.
Who knows, maybe I'll be asked to do a webinar on said topic in the future.
I love it. You've just committed, I heard, for next fall. That's what I heard. I wrote it down. So does anybody else have any questions? Edwardsville, you guys okay?
I think we're good. I mean, everything you shared is great information. And as you know, Katie, I'm working with the Social Science Committee, and I see some things that were presented today that we definitely need to check out as a team. I mean, awesome. Great information. Great information. Thank you.
Okay. Great. And if I could be of any other help to you in Edwardsville, as you're looking at that as a curriculum team, please feel free to reach out. illinoiscivics.org. My information is there. Katie also knows where to find me. So
she can't hide. I know. We had awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mary Ellen, for joining us today. This was wonderful. Tons of great resources. I know I can't wait to go and click some of the links in your PowerPoint because I want to go explore some of those resources. So thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes. And I hope all of you have a wonderful evening.
All right. Thank you,
Thank you
everyone.
all. Bye.
Thanks.